Well, Carol Tetzlaff, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you, Courtney, for inviting me. I'm excited to talk to your listeners and just have this conversation today.
Yeah, we met each other as a part of an organization that we are both a part of here in Phoenix, and then you are so busy that like to find a spot on your schedule, like I'm like, oh my gosh, this is awesome because
I know we actually met.
We actually met. I know. So we actually are in the same city, but we're on Zoom because it would take too long to go all the way across the city. So thank you for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. Well, I just wanted to tell a little story on Courtney first, because we did meet at I think it was at a Christmas event.
Yes.
That was a smaller event that this organization does. And we sat across from each other, and literally we did not stop talking the entire time. And then I asked her to take a goofy picture with me, and I knew instantly we would be friends.
It was me, you, and Tracy Steele, and the three of us. Weren't we like taking a picture with like a snowman or something? Like
Yeah. So it was super fun, and it's just been a delight to get to know you a little bit and to be here with you. So, a little bit about me. So I do live in Gilbert, Arizona, not too far from Courtney. Mm-hmm. And I served on my church staff actually for 22 years. Yeah. I served in every capacity possible. From children's ministry, youth ministry, and I ended doing both women's ministry and worship ministries. Mm-hmm. And God just in that time just really began to move and stir in my life and move me to start writing and teaching and speaking. And I now have a book that's published, and my everyday job is now with my publisher, Redemption Press. Yeah. And for them, I create content and I just do a lot of things. I'm married. We have 4 kids and 10. Sorry. We had a foster kid, so I forgot. Okay. We actually left the house. So 10 grandkids. Okay. And we just have a ton of fun together. I love super sweet iced coffee. I love the color yellow, and I love shopping.
If you check out her Instagram, you can see that yellow is like your thing. You're wearing yellow today. There's yellow and blue all over the backdrop.
Right. So. My office. Yeah.
Have you always loved yellow?
I have. When I was a kid, I painted my room yellow. I had a yellow bedspread. Like I wanted a yellow VW Bug when I started driving. That didn't happen. My mom bought me a tan Ford Escort.
Oh, no.
Disappointment, but at least it was a car.
It moved.
Right.
I had yellow actually, but mine was yellow and green. It was all sunflowers.
Oh,
in
nice.
my room. Mm-hmm. So I had yellow walls, I think, and something else. So it's just such a bright color. Why not?
It is. Super cheery.
That's right. Well, congratulations on, your retirement from your church. 22 years in the ministry is a lot. And I kind of smiled when you said I basically did everything, because I feel like that's something you don't know when you're going into ministry, but anyone coming out of it knows that you're never just going to do one thing. You're going to wear various hats in your time in ministry, and probably more than one hat at a time. So congratulations on that. But then you just in fact, I congratulated you on your retirement. You're like, yeah, I'm not actually retiring.
Not at all. I'm busier than I've ever been. I thought church ministry was busy. What I'm doing now is crazy busy. But the great thing is I get to travel. I get to meet so many people across the United States. I get to speak and to teach and just meet people who have a story to tell and want to write a book. And it's just a lot of fun.
So talk a little bit about what you've stepped into with your publisher, because, you and I, as we were chatting before, you were like, there's actually this discipleship, part of it that I really wanted to see come to fruition at our publisher. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I loved doing women's ministry, youth ministry, all the things because of the discipleship element within it. Mm-hmm. And when I came to work for Redemption Press, my main role was creating content for them. And then I started taking over the events, and then I started doing trainings and just a bunch of things. And as I began to really go through all of these things that I was now putting on, I was like, there's an element really missing. We're missing reaching the heart of the writer. We're giving them such great content, but we're not really speaking into their lives. And we are, like, we're a Christian publisher. And so we did have that element, but being able to do it intentionally. And so everything we do has devotional elements to it. It has this, getting in the word, being accountable, having those communities where you can come around each other and have relationship and have accountability. So it's been really fun to do that. Even like in our last conference, we did our first in-person conference this year, and we had all the ladies sitting at tables, and they were assigned a table with a table leader so that during that whole 2.5 days, they could really cultivate relationships and get to know each other. And the friendships that were established there are huge. And it's an element of discipleship for them to start now, iron sharpening iron, getting together, really helping each other out on this writing journey.
Because just like in writing, in any area professionally, there's no one that truly understands what you're going through more than someone who does the same thing you do. And so with authors, some of these struggles that they're going to walk through, another author can either say like, you've got this, keep going, or I was there and this is what I did, which I think that's the basic, that's like the basic part of discipleship that I think people miss. They think it's something much higher, much more like spiritual. And it is. It absolutely is. But at its foundation, it's encouraging one another when we're not sure what's next and how to work. Yeah.
It's living life together with the element and the truth that Jesus is.
Yeah.
And so as we point each other towards Jesus in whatever aspect of life, any part of life that we are in, it's a beautiful marriage of friendships that can come together and really, spur each other on to good things with Jesus as the center.
I love that. And anytime you're doing something creative, there comes a moment where you're like, I have nothing. I have nothing to give today. I have nothing creative left inside of me. I have literally poured everything I have into this, whatever you're creating. And to have those other people be like, no, you do have something, but maybe it is a day to just step away, and that's okay. You have permission to step away from it. Fill yourself, because when you're giving so much, you're pouring out. Sometimes you have to allow yourself to be poured into. And that sounds like your conference and those relationships. I mean, how refreshing for your authors to be able to come and be poured into for a weekend, spiritually and relationally. And I would like to think that they probably went home and had this refreshed ability to sit back down and begin, creating what God has put in their heart to create. So I absolutely love that. Now, you have written a book, and it's called Ezra, Unleashing the Power of Praise, Rebuilding Broken into Beautiful Through Worship. So I want to know, in fact, I said this to you when you were telling me this is the book I'm writing. I'm like, Ezra, like, that's not really like, oh, you're writing one on Ruth or on, Ephesians. And no, Ezra, that was the right first book or Bible study for you to write. So why?
Yeah. So Ezra was an interesting choice. I would even agree with that statement. I was actually introduced to the book of Ezra in 2011. It was during a really hard season of ministry. It seemed like everything in our church was just falling apart and every ministry was crumbling. And, when you're in church ministry, and really anywhere where you are working intimately with people, it's really hard to be able to really divulge your feelings and find someone you can, trust with you and what was going on.
Yeah.
And so during this time, a friend of mine told me about this Bible study that was not too far. Now, we had a women's Bible study at our church, but I never really went to it because I was always, busy working. But she invited me to the study. And so I went, and I loved it, first of all, because I walked into a room. Not one single person knew me. They didn't ask me how to turn the air down or, where the bathrooms were. I walked in and I could simply just be. It was almost like, though the group was probably almost 200 women, I felt very much alone, and I actually loved it.
I was gonna say, usually that would be like a bad, like a red, like, stop, you're not doing your ministry right. But you're saying for you, it was nice to almost not be known in this situation.
Right. Well, and I was that person that I would walk in like right after it started and leave before it ended. So I was very purposeful in it. Now, I did meet the woman that was teaching, who was the women's ministry director, and she became my confidant, the person I could talk to, share the things that were going on with, because she knew no one in my circumstances. And yet I could trust her. And she brought me so much hope. But she started teaching the first week I was there and opened the Bible to the book of Ezra. And I was like, Ezra, all right, I think he's a prophet. Like, I don't know. Like he's kind
Hold
of in
on.
that area.
Let me check the table of contents. I'll be with you in a second.
Right. I'm like, I know Nehemiah, he comes
Right.
after, but who knows Ezra?
Yeah.
But as she began to teach, so Ezra is all about people that are broken, that are coming back to a devastated city and rebuilding it. And it really spoke to that rebuilding in my own life of everything that was broken. And it was just this obedience of God's people that they would return to the place of their ancestors and in obedience build the temple and build the city back up. And it was just a beautiful moment because it spoke to me in every aspect of the ministry that I was a part of. And what I would do then, because I would sneak out before they would have to go into discussion time, so I wouldn't have to talk to anyone, and I would just go to a coffee shop and just sit in whatever her teaching was that week and ask God to speak to me in it. And within a year after I had done that Bible study and really started studying even more intently myself, I felt God say to me, like, I want you to write a Bible study on the book of Ezra. And I was like, huh. So I started kind of writing one, and it took me 10 years to be obedient.
Wow.
Well, about 9 years. And then it came out the 10th year. But yeah, and it was just a book that changed everything that was who I was in my life, how my perspective was of worship and what it means to be a worshiper. And the obedience caused God to open all these doors, and my sphere of influence has like exploded. And it was just that moment when I realized, like Ezra, being obedient causes God to do great things and really does rebuild broken into beautiful.
Okay. So this obedience thing, were you really just sitting there and not writing it, or did it take you 9 years to write it because you were allowing other things to get in the way?
Good question. So I actually wrote everything but Ezra. So I had written during that 9 years, I wrote 7 other Bible studies that I used while doing women's ministries.
Okay.
Taught through them. I mean, full on like 8-week studies with, full week homework. Yeah. And then God finally was like, where's Ezra?
Remember that book that changed your life? Where's that at? I love that it's Old Testament, because I think what I have found in the last 3 years is that God has really used the Old Testament to speak to me and to the situations that I'm in, where I think naturally kind of in the church today, we think like, oh, that's going to be New Testament. You want the New Testament. And instead, like I find Exodus was one of them that really like spoke to me, like in a time of like real struggle and real darkness. God was like, go to Exodus. And I was like, what? But it was like exactly what I needed to hear. And then the next year after that, where we were looking and searching for guidance, Micah. God was like, go to Micah. And I was like, I don't know that I've ever like really studied that book. And I read it. And the fact that it was like, I'm looking at the year 2021 and comparing it to the people in Micah, and I'm going, are these not the same people? Like they were, I was like, he could be describing our culture today. And God's like, that's why I needed you to see this year. And so I love that the Old Testament can still speak to us on such a deep level. And hey, listeners, if you are not studying the Old Testament, like get in, like, okay, you don't have to start in Genesis. I didn't start in Genesis and read Micah. I just went straight for Micah, and I heard one verse, Micah 7:7.
We just talked about this week at my team meeting. I'm not kidding you.
That was my life verse last year, was
it.
like just over. And my biggest thing was like praying expectantly, not just praying, but like, I'm going to pray this, and then I'm going to expectantly sit and wait and watch what the Lord's going to do. And so that I was like, well, if this is going to be my life verse, I should probably know what else is going on in, in context. And so I dug into Micah, the book. And so so we talked about why you chose Ezra. What is it that you learned in Ezra that maybe was like a surprise for you? You're like, I didn't know that was there. I didn't know that you had that like bit of truth for me, God.
Yeah. So a couple things really. So Ezra kind of became my Bible boyfriend, I would say, because like he's super cool. And I think a lot of times when we think of Ezra, we think of some old man in robes and like a long beard. But Ezra was actually born when God's people were taken from Jerusalem and exiled into Babylon. And
Mm,
so he was most likely born there in Babylon. So
okay.
he had never really been to Jerusalem before. So he's actually probably a young guy because he actually sticks around for Ezra and Nehemiah. So
Hmm.
you have quite a bit of life there. But there's something that's said about Ezra, how he was a man of the word and how he didn't just read it, but he obeyed it and then he taught it, which was discipleship. Like it's all about, so Ezra was the guy, like he was preparing himself in a pagan place, in a pagan culture to come back eventually and really help God's people spur on to obedience. Um,
Mm.
there's a verse in the book of Ezra that I absolutely came to love. And it's found when the people, they get back to Jerusalem and they become discouraged, and the people around the land, the enemies of the land, come in and they discourage them from rebuilding this their building, their temple.
Yeah.
And so they stop building for 14 years. And then finally some prophets come back and encourage them and they start building again. And the next time the enemies come, the people have a very different answer when they come and say, well, you need to stop building the temple. And they say, we are the people of God and we are rebuilding. It's like their identity had shifted. They
Wow.
recognized who they belong to during that 14-year journey of being disobedient. But
Mm.
during that time, God used it to shape them into the place that when the enemy would come, they would be able to stand up and say, I know who I am. I know what my mission is. And we are rebuilding.
Wow. And what a message for us, because we've got all kinds of things flying at us on social media, in the news or on the internet that are like, what you believe is wrong or what you're doing is a silly
Mm,
choice. And what you're saying is that because these people were convinced that this is the direction that God wanted them to go, they were like, sorry, nothing can take me from being obedient.
right.
I love that. Now you kind of found within this, within the book of Ezra, this concept of worship. And you are a worship leader, we're a worship leader. And I said, what concept of worship are you talking about? I think I asked you that once and you're like, well, it's so much more than music. And I was like, I'm so glad to hear you say that because I believe that that is true. So what does it mean? I mean, it's in unleashing the power of praise and praise music. So that must mean music, right? That must mean worship, and
Right.
worship is music. What does worship mean to you?
All right. So worship in the book of Ezra first comes from just the tradition of the people, because
Mm,
the people were thinking, we've got to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple so we can worship, because it was all about a place. It was about sacrifices. And yes, those were things that God put in place to help people understand who Jesus was or was going to be when he came. Um, but as they began living their life there, I think even they recognized that it was much more than a building, much more than the traditions of a Sunday morning,
mm,
worship service. And we get that confused because we call it worship service, worship music, worship leader. Like, wouldn't you think that worship was all about church? But really, Paul gives one of the best definitions of worship in Romans 12, 1 and 2, where he says,
mm.
I urge you, I beg of you, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is proper worship.
Mm.
And so worship, according to Paul, is every single morning when we wake up, we place ourselves on that altar of obedience to surrender to God. Now, the problem that we have is that the sacrifices today, our worship being placed on the altar, we are living. In the Old Testament, they would actually kill the animal before they'd put
Right.
them on, so the animal could not get off. But we have this tendency to crawl off the altar and start worshiping other things. And so
I don't know
what
why.
we
I just get
wanted,
these like weird alien things like crawling off of or like too many bugs crawling off the altar or something. But you're
so a little
right.
bit too much science fiction.
Yeah, yeah, basically. But we do get
um,
off. You're right.
We do, because we want to worship other things. We have all these, little baby thrones around us that we are placing ourselves on instead of looking to God and placing him in the center of our life. But it's something that's very intentional. You have to wake up every single day and recognize who you are living for and what that life looks like.
So first of all, I loved that I don't know if it's another translation or just the way that you said it, but when I've heard that verse, I've heard this is your spiritual act of worship. And you said this is proper worship.
Yes.
Is that from another translation?
It is. I think it's NIV. I actually,
Okay.
how you can Bible Hub something and then
Yes.
like BibleHub.com put in one verse and it gives you like, oh, I like that one the best.
So listeners, if you've never used Bible Hub, so basically you could put like John 3:16 in, and you put it into Google, and Bible Hub is probably going to be one of the first ones that comes up, to be honest. But then Bible Hub will show it to you in like every translation you could. And I find sometimes this is one of my like Bible study skills that I use. If there's a scripture I don't understand, I'll put it in, I'll look at it in Bible Hub and read it in these different versions. And sometimes that gives me a better understanding of what I'm reading, or I'm like, oh, okay, now it makes sense in context with the rest of what I'm reading, using those different translations. But I love that proper worship, because it's like there is a way to do this, and this is the way to do it. This is the proper way to make a vanilla cake. This is the proper way to, clean a room, or the proper way to make a bed. This is the right way to make a bed. Well, this is the right way to worship God. It seems a little though, like, okay, so the spiritual act of worship, you're not giving, like, it's not giving us a to-do list for what proper worship looks like. Right. Is there a to-do list, or is it just the way that we live?
It really is the way that we live. It's more of an attitude of your heart than the expression of like what your hands do. An example that I could give you for proper everyday worship is simply when you do the dishes. I mean, all of us as women, we have dishes to do. I walk out into my kitchen, and right now, like, all of our kids are gone. And when the grandkids aren't over, I walk out and I'm like, who is eating all the food that makes all these dishes? Because we always seem to have dishes in the sink. And I remember complaining one time, like in my head, when I was doing the dishes, I was just so frustrated, other things to do, and I'm doing the dishes. And I was talking to my Bible study group one day about this moment. And I had a woman pause and stop me and say, Carol, instead of complaining about doing the dishes, why don't you thank God for the family that you have that created the dishes to do? And as I did Ezra, I remembered that statement from so long ago. And I thought, that's worship. Worship is an attitude of gratefulness that is beyond just the normal everyday saying thank you. It's an attitude no matter where you are, whether you're sitting at a boardroom table having a meeting, or you are doing the laundry, or you're on the floor playing with your kids, just the attitude that is in your heart of thankfulness for the moments that he's given you, even when hard stuff arrives. We can worship even when we're hurting, even when we're sick, even when things aren't going right, because it's the attitude of our heart that really focuses our thoughts on who Jesus is and what he has brought into our life for us to experience.
And that's really hard on a day when all of life seems to be going wrong. And on a day when maybe just the mundane to-do list is way too long for it's not even a 24-hour period, because you got to sleep in there. So, the 12 hours that you have to do things, it can be really hard to be thankful for kind of all of these mundane things. It can be hard to be thankful for the car that you had to take into the mechanic, but it's totally ruining your day because you hadn't planned to take it to the mechanic, but you have a car. And to be thankful for that. It's a different way, I think, of looking at life. And it's interesting coming from Ezra, because if you think about the history of Israel, it had not been fun. It had not been easy. Now, was it because of their own sin? Yeah, it was. Is that why they were in Babylon? Yeah, it was. But I think it's interesting to read those Old Testament stories and see the people that kept the faith in a culture that was very pagan and in a culture that wanted to make them look like Babylonians and not like Israelites. You see the story of Daniel. You see how he had his spiritual act of worship that he was unwilling to bend, even in the face of death. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the same thing. And Ezra's there. And like you said, he's born in Babylon. I wonder, did he know the story of Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? I would assume so, because those were kind of big deals. But you mentioned that even in this pagan culture, he was a man of the word. How does our time in the word, our time reading the Bible, how does that match up with our proper act of worship?
Yeah. So in order for us to really worship God, we have to know him. And if the only way we can truly know God is through his word, I mean, that's where he reveals himself to us. There are ways that you can experience God through other avenues. Like you can experience God at church. You can experience God with another believing friend. You can experience God through nature. So there's aspects that you can see of who God is, but you really can't know his heart until you begin to read the word. And so being in the word every single day, no matter what that looks like for you, whether it's a 5-minute, take a moment and pull it up on your phone and read it while you're in the car line at school, because life's been busy. And if you have to wait in a car line, we know that's like an hour every day.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jesus. I don't have to pick kids up anymore. But it's just being immersed in it, and put praise and worship music on. Surround yourself with things that point you to his throne. I actually have had a pretty bad week. And there's just been some things that I've had to deal with, some things God's been working in me, in my heart, and in my life. And I could put myself in a place where I just want to disappear and just want to stop doing what I'm doing and walk away. But one of the things I do is first of all, I always spend time in the word. I mean, there's very rarely a day that I will not, and I'm in a different season than most people, where I wake up to a very quiet house, just my husband and I get up very early. I fix myself a cup of coffee before the sun comes up and just sit and be still. But there are still moments where I get to the point where I just want to give in and give up. And turning on worship music, even if I'm just in the bedroom getting ready for the day, just changes and helps me shift my worship to where it needs to be.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to give advice to two different groups of women.
Okay.
On that, engaging God's words. First of all, what is your encouragement for the mom who is still waiting in that line, who does have young kids, who does have a busy family schedule? What is your encouragement for making sure that they're finding time with the Lord?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really hard thing. I mean, our youngest daughter has 3 little boys at home, and they're usually up before her. They're the ones rapping on the door in the morning, "Mommy, I need milk," or whatever. And by the time she puts him in bed at night, she's exhausted. And my encouragement for someone like her is, find a community. Find a place where your kids have childcare and you can go during the week and, be a part of a community. But then there are lots of resources that are super simple. Like they have, the Bible app has a verse of the day. I have a friend that's all she does. She reads the verse of the day. She may, if she has time, pull up the chapter it's from and kind of read around it, pray through it. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of time to read a simple verse. I mean, so for example, if the verse was, you are the light of the world in 1 John, you can then, or I guess that's Matthew. Sorry.
Matthew. Yeah. Okay.
Matthew 5. Sorry. I was the other. 1 John's full of light verses.
Yes.
But you are the light of the world. You can read that verse and then you can say, okay, Jesus, thank you for making me the light of the world. How can I today affect the world of my kids so that I can shine my light for them, for you in their life? And so it's a very simple, just like take that simple scripture and apply it immediately to your circumstance and live it out as best you can through the day, really focusing on, just honoring Jesus through that.
Yeah. And I actually find when you're being really simple about it, as opposed to like, I'm going to sit and read 3 chapters, sometimes, because it is busy when you've got young kids, sometimes it actually helps it to come up several times during the day, because God can just bring that to mind instead of like, oh, what did I read? I read a lot. I read like 3 or 4 chapters today. And if that's where you're at and you have the time, great. But if you are reading 3 or 4 chapters, what's the one takeaway? One thing, that one verse that jumped out on you that you can meditate on throughout the day, so that God can bring that over and over into your mind, and you can meditate on that throughout the day. So I love that you're not like telling us it's all about more, but it sounds like instead you're saying it's all about being intentional.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really good, Courtney.
Okay. So what is the second? So the second group is a woman whose kids are gone, and she's an empty nester, maybe has been for a while. And she's just trying to find this balance between spending time with God, but also making sure that she's like out of the house and finding basically she was so wrapped up in her kids, right? And what they were doing, that when her kids left, she realized maybe her community was not where it needed to be. And so you're like, go and find somebody and go and do so. I don't know anyone, and I'm too old to make friends, maybe.
Right. No, and that's true. And I think really just being intentional again about community, because there's lots of, wherever you live, there are tons of women's groups that meet throughout the week, during the day, in the evenings. Almost every church has a women's Bible study of some sort that you could be a part of to gain those intentional communities. But then too, once you have raised your kids, so the last couple years, I actually stopped when my girls graduated, but I went to the local Christian high school, and they have a discipleship program that happens once a week. And you have a group of probably 8 to 10 girls or guys, depending. And you meet with them for 45 minutes once a week. It was a Wednesday morning, and I would just drive over to the school. I'd bring them treats. We'd talk about life. We'd pray together. We'd, ask each other questions. And because God has allowed me to have so many amazing people in my life, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but for me to be able to pour back in. So instead of trying to find someone to always fill you, how can you now intentionally go out and reach others and use all the things that you've learned growing up? Your kids have grown up. Maybe it's a young mom that just needs somebody to walk beside her, and you can bring her lunch once a week and give her someone to talk to besides her children. So just being intentional.
Yes, we need that.
That's not getting in the word specifically, but that's how you use your, what God's given you.
No, I love that. Because I think that's what the word calls us to do, right? It's not just about increasing our knowledge or yes, we need to be doing that, our understanding of who Christ is. But sometimes the best way to understand who Christ is to serve. And to serve others. And I think that's one of our purposes. The first one is to glorify God, and the other one is to serve others. And discipleship, I love that, by the way, that, discipleship program within a high school. Let's do that. More high schoolers, that's amazing. But finding those opportunities and not believing the lie that Satan will try to tell us that you're too old and you're no longer relevant, and the younger generation doesn't want to know what you have to say.
Those girls, we still are in connection, and they graduated. They're now in their sophomore year of college, but I had them for several years, and we've developed this beautiful friendship, and I cheered them on. And one of the things, I didn't come to them with a Bible verse every day and we're going to do this study, and we just did life together. And I just let them ask me questions if they're struggling with boys, if they're struggling with grades, if they're struggling with parents, and give them godly wisdom within the rhythms of their own life. And then I would go and I would watch. I had one gal, she is a beautiful ballerina. She's actually at a huge ballet academy now, like studying for college and doing all the dancing. And but I would go watch her ballet performances, at the big places downtown when she was in the Nutcracker. And I would go to their sports games and pick them up and bring them cookies when we had COVID shutdown. I'd take stuff to their houses. And so it was just being a part of their life. And what I call it often in discipleship is just watching them dance. Like you don't have to take a Bible with you. You just have to do life with them, because when they see your life and how you emulate Jesus in everything, they're going to want to be like you because you've invested so much in them, and they want to be like you because they see Jesus, not because they see some great person.
Wow. I love that idea that just watch them dance. And like, if life is a dance, they may fall, and you're there to help them up without judgment. And sometimes it's easier, if you're not their parent, for them to come to you when they do fall and say, I'm going to be honest with you about something that I don't know that I can be honest with my parents about. My parents were really wise in introducing us to people like that.
So good.
You know, like, if you can't talk to us, you can talk to one of these people. We're open. We would love to be here for you, but we understand that we're your mom and dad, and it could get awkward.
Right.
You know,
and you're probably still close to those people today that were in your life.
Oh, for sure. For sure. It's a gift that I didn't know I needed. My parents did. And actually, I say that to them, and they're like, we didn't know what we were doing. You know, they're like, we didn't know we were setting you up for this. We just needed help, and we knew that we couldn't be everything to you and your brother. So, yeah, I think that's amazing that you're there for these girls, and that they know they can contact you and talk to you about the spiritual stuff and the like everyday stuff. Well, you have your Ezra book out there. Where can we find more about you? You also speak nationwide. If someone wants to have you come and speak at their church, where can we find you and your book?
All right. So super easy, caroltetzlaff.com. So you can just go there. You can order my book actually on my website. So my book actually has 2 different print runs. Okay. One is a grayscale interior, and one is a color interior. But I can give you a whole podcast on publishing and how things work. But basically, it's super expensive to print on demand in color. And so the one that you could get on Amazon or any .com site is in black and white. And then the one that I have in my garage is in color, and it's beautiful. The designers just did an amazing job with it. So yeah. And then also my information's there. You can just hit contact if you want me to come and speak. I love speaking to women. I love talking about discipleship. I love spurring women on to a life that is of holiness, and one that is just worshiping God alone.
Yeah. See, people, you see why we had plenty to talk about the first time we met.
For sure.
You know, in fact, I had been told, oh, you haven't met Carol Tetzlaff? How do you not know Carol Tetzlaff? You need to meet Carol. And then I'm sure the host of the party that we were at set us next to each other on purpose. Because she's like, how have you not met Carol Tetzlaff? You need to meet Carol Tetzlaff. You're going to sit next to Carol Tetzlaff.
I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah. She kept saying the same thing about you and Tracy. Like, you guys need to meet. You have to meet Tracy still. You have to meet Courtney.
We also happen to be like the younger generation in this group that we're with. And I think she was like, here, the 3 of you need to meet each other and raise each other up, encourage each other, and that type of stuff. Right. So we have a question that we ask everyone, and that is, because we are not meant to live life alone, as you have mentioned in this discipleship topic and in this worship topic, who is it that's helped you along in your journey?
Oh my goodness. I have been blessed. And just like you, Courtney, I didn't recognize at the time what they were doing, but now looking back over my life, I see how intentionally God placed these women in my life.
Yeah.
When I was a teenager, I had a woman named Sandy. She passed away a few years ago. I met her in 6th grade, and she walked me through my entire high school career. She was the person who taught me the most about the word. She would take me everywhere, me and a small group of friends. She would take us to the football games across town because we didn't have cars at the time, or we weren't old enough to drive so that we could go to the games that we wanted to. She was amazing and just loved us right where we were. When I became a young adult after I graduated from college, I was single for many years and desperately like, God, why aren't you answering the prayer of my heart to have a husband? You're answering everybody else's. Like, what about me? And I sat in her living room. I actually, she was at our church. She was a wife of one of our pastors, older woman. She's now in her 90s. And I went in when she was making copies, and I said, would you disciple me? And she spent probably 6 years of me coming to her house once a week during my lunch hour. I was a teacher, but I had a little bit longer lunch hour.
Okay.
I could go to her house and I would just sit at her feet and we would just go through the word together, and she would pray for me and support me. But it's actually shifted now in my life. And yes, there are people that I come alongside, but I have a different perspective on that person being older as to who I want to speak into my life. And so now, even though I have a lot of people that pray for me and encourage me, and I know if something's happening, I can send them a quick message and they'll support me or whatever it is. But really, my most significant relationship right now is my publisher, who is also the person I work for, who has also become just one of my dearest friends. And the reason why is because she pushes me to work through hard things, the everyday, my attitudes, my actions, things that may not be to a standard of holiness that I really want before my God. And so now it is so important for me to have that person in my life who doesn't always agree with me, who doesn't just say things to appease me, but who really spurs me on to live a life of holiness. And we can be more like Jesus. And when you find that person, you are so blessed, because even when they say things that hurt you and you're like, I don't like this, but I know that I need to work my way through this and navigate this part of my soul so that I can move on to what God's really calling me to do in obedience.
And that's so beneficial that you have that relationship where when she speaks truth, you listen, like you said, even when it's difficult, because if you don't have that person that can speak truth and you will listen, then there's probably you're going to make more mistakes than you need to. Because the only way you're going to learn that something is not good is by doing it and falling flat on your face. And instead, if we're willing to listen and receive the wisdom that someone can share with us, then sometimes we can avoid some of the mistakes that maybe others are going to have to make in order to learn it. So that is amazing that God has provided her in your life at this time. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for all that you've shared with us. I really appreciate, the ministry that you are doing to authors. And I appreciate your book on Ezra that really helps us to see this idea of worshiping in the midst of, chaos and rebuilding, and in the midst of really understanding other people are going to say that what we're doing is wrong, but we have to continue in the direction that God has called us to. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. I always end when I teach on Ezra or when I do a podcast or anything, with a statement that I think you would glean from if you did the study or if you studied Ezra even on your own. And it is, may the story of my life be worship in his eyes.
I love that.
So thank you, Courtney, for having me today. I appreciate it. I love that I got to speak to your listeners, and just pray that God will use this to spur them on to a life of worship.
Thank you so much.